So I think we're ready to go. And so we have some questions that we're going to try to think about in some different areas. We're going to think a little bit about environment. We're going to think a little bit about instruction, teacher issues, student issues. But really, I want to be careful too. We have teachers or principals, educators on the call today from Los Angeles to New York. We have people from Moscow and from Doha. We have people from really all over. And we know that everyone's contexts are very different and that we won't be able to answer many of the questions that people have today. But really, the biggest goal is to be able to bring questions to the forefront and especially be able to help people think about questions that perhaps they hadn't even thought about. When I was a principal, it was always the things that I didn't think about in advance that ended up becoming the biggest issues. So, so we'll just go ahead and get started. And so where I thought we might just start with some very practical issues. And so I'm wondering if George and Beth and Shaz and Fraser and Erin, if you might start off by just talking a little bit about kind of a typical student day and what's different about that typical day, just procedurally as students are coming into school and going through a day, some of the things that you've had to do already that are very different than they were a couple months ago. So Beth, I don't know if you would mind starting us off. I'll try to make sure we have different people start different ones off, but Beth, if you might start off and then other people can add on things that are different in their particular schools.
Yeah, sure, Matt. Happy to do that. So, hi everyone. I'm Beth Dressler, coming to you from Dresden, Germany. Actually, at the moment, from Rostock, Germany. We have a long weekend here, so we took advantage of a loosening of restrictions and have come up to the Baltic Sea. So, but heading back to Dresden today to go back to campus. We did our opening in 4 phases. It was a phased reopening, and we were guided from the start by Saxony. That's the state in which Dresden is in. And they gave us all, they gave fairly clear guidance for schools that we had to follow. And some of that, thinking about when the students enter, it is all staggered. So we used to have, one start time for all kids. Kids were welcome to come onto campus early, where we would have someone supervising before school play in the morning. And we had to stop all of that. So the students come in, depending on grades, from kindergarten to grade 2, they come in at 8:30. And from grades 3 to 5, they come in at 8:15. They need to come in all different entrances. We're fairly lucky at our school that we have 4 possible entrances onto the school campus that we can use. So we have them all at different areas, different staging areas. The other thing that's become a little bit of a problem with that entrance is that students, that parents cannot come onto campus. So students, we don't open the gates until 8:30 or 8:15, depending on the grade level. So students are standing outside the campus along with parents, which is causing a little bit of more grouping and less social distancing than you would want to have happen. So that's been a challenge for us. But yeah, students come in at all different times, and then every classroom has an exit to the outdoors. So they're using different stairways to get into classrooms, which has been a benefit for us as well.
And Beth, does that change the length of your teacher day then as well, or is?
Yeah, so we ended up shortening our teacher day because some of the guidance the guidance that we have in Saxony is now all strict groupings. So it doesn't matter how big in primary school, how big the class is, it just matters that group of kids stays together. So the majority of our classes are about 21 students, but in local public schools, they could go up to 26, 28, sometimes 30 kids. So what it means is within the strict grouping that those kids have to stay together, and we had to limit the number of teachers that interact with them. So we can only have the homeroom teacher interacting with their particular group of kids, and that group of kids, they have to stay together. So we shortened our day from so either 8:15 or 8:30 to 12 or 12:15, depending on the grade level. Then we do all of our single subjects. So we offer performing arts, music, German, and all of those happen in the afternoon in a blended learning environment.
Beth, there was a question about how many students you have in your school total.
Yeah, so okay, across our school, so we actually go from 3-year-olds to 18-year-olds, and across the school we're at about 515. And the campus that I work on is we go from 5-year-olds to 18-year-olds on our campus. And within primary, we have, we're around about 225 on the campus. And then our preschool is in another building farther away. So we're also having to manage our secondary school and when they come in and when they exit as well. That's been a little bit complicated, but they come in later. They're coming in at 8:45, and as well, they have a shortened school day.
Beth, can you explain a little more about the afternoon setup with the blended learning for the music and art and that sort of thing?
Yeah. So prior to when we were not learning on campus and when we were learning online, we're using Seesaw in kindergarten to grade 2, and we're using Google Classroom in grades 3 to 5. So we were continuing to provide performing arts, music, German, learning support all online. And when we had to change to go back onto campus and we had to limit the number of people that the adults were interacting with, we just kept all of their learning, all of the learning for performing arts, for music, and for German, we just kept that online, and it's rolling out. It just continued to roll out. So that was one of the things when we planned our return to campus for the learning. We didn't want the learning to change. We wanted that to stay as it was when we were online. So in the first few weeks and days of moving into it, the teachers were relying heavily on Google Classroom and on Seesaw within the classroom setting. But now those homeroom teachers have pulled back on that, but it's continued for the single subjects.
Beth, there's a question. I'm sorry, Matt.
Yeah. Good.
There's a question around the core content areas for middle and high school. If students are required to stay with one teacher, how do they get direct instruction in these core content areas?
So that's a great question. And in the guidance that we have, so from the state of Saxony, it's two different guidance that they're giving. So for primary schools, it is strict grouping, meaning that the primary school group, that homeroom classroom, they stay together and they can't interact with other grade levels or even the other homeroom, because we've got 2 homerooms per grade level, and they need to just stay with that teacher. However, in secondary schools, it's social distancing and small groupings. So they've had to group at about 10 students per subject, and they maintain social distancing within their classrooms. So it's been a real challenge within the secondary school to timetable all of that, but the teacher can move from class to class because they are maintaining 1.5 meter distance and they're having to wear masks. It looks completely different than it does for our setting within primary. But it's brought challenges for us because we're all on one campus.
So George, is that, I'm curious, and Shaz and everybody else, I'm curious if that's similar or if there are any differences in that with your schools.
Yeah, there's a lot of similarities. This is George Dolesch from Basel. Good morning, good afternoon to everyone. Good evening, Shaz. Yeah, there are a lot of similarities. We had the staggered times as well. Obviously, we did things a little bit different. Beth, I don't know if you guys did, but we had to decrease our class sizes. And so that posed a challenge. And so when we reopened on May 11th, our grade 5s continued with the DLP, the distance learning plan. And that gave us another 7, 8 sections of classroom space. So we took each homeroom and we had about 10 kids to a maximum of 12 kids. And we used our EAL and learning support teachers, one of our music teachers, to help with that. And so we kind of spread them out. Nice thing is we had 2 days of distance learning cease, so the teachers can plan and prep the classrooms with zoning out the desks and the chairs and the tables and putting the tape down in the corridors and making all the signage for the exits and entrances. We also have 3-4 different entrances that we use across the staggered time. We zoned out our playground as well into 9 different zones with a couple of activities that we thought of, but then we thought, you know what, the kids will come up with even better activities. And that's one of the questions asked, what was your biggest learning point? It's been incredible to see the play groups form. Girls and boys who never played before were playing now in groups of 10, 11, or 12 in very creative fashion, hardly have any playground issues. So that's been a big surprise. We have a cafeteria was closed, so it's eating in the classroom. We have a service called Passion Food that delivers, and so they deliver to the classrooms. We have cleaners full time. We have the temperature check in the morning. Our situation at the campus wasn't so bad because we have a big parking lot on our campus. And so with the over 45 minutes of staggered times, our parents have been pretty good at following directions. Although after school, there tends to be a little bit more socializing, and had to tell them, no, now's not a good time to bring your dog and a Frisbee and things like that. So go on home. So we've had a couple of parent issues, but that's basically how ISB rolled with it. So quite similar.
Yeah.
So in Lausanne, Fraser and Erin, I know Erin just came in. There's some differences to that, any differences there for how you guys are handling things?
There is. When we first came back, we had the A-B schedule where it was half the children. And so again, we also had the requirements that the age groups didn't mix. One thing we did a little bit differently was we ended up knowing that the children had not been around one another for a really long time. And so the idea of having them all out on the playground, but then in zones, we just imagined that would be a lot for teachers to manage the zones. So we ended up creating a completely different timetable for those A-B days. One of our goals was the core academic subjects. We wanted a continuity of learning. So we had essentially 4 different groups that I called A through D. We had the A and B children who were in school only on A and B days. And when they were on their alternating days at home, they were continuing with online learning. We had the C group of children whose parents were essential workers, so they were in school every single day. And then we had a D group of children who were not going to be coming into school at all. So when you looked at all of those constraints, the question was, how do we keep the continuity of learning? And then also, how do you accommodate to be a trauma responsive school to accommodate for the fact that these children hadn't been around one another for a while, and there needed to be a new kind of socializing. We didn't want to imprint long-term unfavorable results. So in that, we ended up creating this whole matrix of a schedule where for the core learning, the learning was mapped out on our online planners, and it stayed the same every single day. Whether you were A through D, the core learning was exactly the same. The difference was how you were supported, whether it was a parent at home or you're a teacher at school. For the single subject teachers, we ended up creating a mirror schedule. So whatever they offered A day, they also offered to the B day cohort, so that everything ended up being mirrored. For that C cohort who was there every day, they just had extension. And then on the playground end of things, we were able to set up a complex matrix that did not have multiple age groups out on the playground at the same time. Now that we've moved to all children essentially being back, we're not able to keep that. So now we've moved into zones like George was describing. It sounds really complex, but it really worked really well on those A-B days, where instead of saying 8 days of school, it was really 4 days for single subject teachers, 8 days for the core homeroom teachers. And then for staffing, our homeroom teachers were still offering online learning. So we took away any other duties, no lunch duties, no recess duties, so that they could really focus on their online learning courses that they still had to maintain for those children at home. That was a lot, sorry.
No, that's makes my head hurt just thinking through all that.
Actually, can I just chip in a bit there? There are a couple of things which I think, so it's Fraser from Lausanne here. Hello, Erin. I'm glad you could get in.
Hi.
So I think actually it's really helpful to understand as well from our context actually that Switzerland has really driven the return to school in a very staged kind of way. And their postulates have changed. So the Federal Office of Public Health, their position on school and what the normal expectations have really changed in a very structured kind of way. So we started with the school open just for 3-year-olds. Then it was added 4 to 15-year-olds, but every other day. Then it was 4 to 15-year-olds every day. And then from the 9th of June, we'll be welcoming back the 16 to 18-year-olds every other day. And I think so that has helped us structure our return, but that was set by the government. But the other thing which is interesting, I think, is the government has moved in Switzerland from a position that social distancing is necessary for young children to a position where social distancing is not necessary for young children. And so currently the postulates from the Federal Office of Public Health is that young children play a small role in the spreading of COVID-19. So at the moment, there is no requirement whatsoever for social distancing. And I saw that there was a question earlier about transportation. So now in Switzerland, in school transportation, there is no requirement for social distancing. The requirement that exists is between adults and children. So our staff have to maintain a distance of 2 meters between them and the child, and also between adults and adults, but the children do not. And that's actually a shift over the last couple of weeks, because early on, a lot of our efforts, as Erin described, was an attempt to keep children socially distanced. So there's a here in that.
Yeah, I'll just throw in too, we've had the same shift here. When we went back to campus on the 4th of May with our first grade level, which was grades 4 and 11, and we were told then that it was with grade 4, they had to be socially, they had to have 2.5 meter distance. We had to keep them separated. We had to have smaller groups. Then when they made the call that we were going back for other grade levels on the 18th of May, that's when they made the change to the strict groupings, but that's only in primary school. So for us in secondary school, which in Germany starts in grade 5, that's when social distancing, all of those rules kick in. So for me in primary, I've got clearly kids in 5th grade are part of the primary school, but they have a different set of rules and expectations that they need to abide to than we do in primary, which has been a bit tricky, but it's been great for primary kids because they can work together in classrooms, they can sit together, and for the teacher, they have to maintain distance. And if they can't, then they wear a mask. Yeah.
So one of the things I'm wondering about is what kinds of things do you wish you knew a month ago? So what have you learned out of that? I mean, what's been surprising questions or things that have come up or things that I know you guys planned for everything you could think of, but there are always things that were unexpected. So Shaz, I'm wondering if there's something that's come up that you, and I'll ask each of you, right? Just something that's happened or something that's come up that you didn't anticipate, knowing you anticipated so many things.
In Australia, we're in a slightly different situation in that we haven't been at this as long as many countries. So we have only been working remotely for 6 weeks. And then I think the thing that challenged us the most was the lack of clarity of decision-making from the government. I'm at a government school, and so it was a nice position to be in, to know that at least there was, a government body who were going to be giving us these structures to follow. So at least we didn't have to create everything ourselves. By the same token, because of the changing nature of our understanding of how the virus was spreading, that we were in a position where for a long time weeks and weeks, well, since January, since Chinese New Year, when we were watching what was happening in Hong Kong and Asia. But as far as Australia was concerned, we didn't have many cases. And so we were watching it sort of looming like a tidal wave, but not quite sure where we were fitting in. And consequently, we only were out for 6 weeks before we would then, and had planned to be out for a 10-week term. And then just as we got our rhythm, so we said, we put so much time into setting up that infrastructure and building that plane while we were flying it, and everyone was just getting into the rhythm of everything. And then we were told, in a week's time, you'll be going back. So that's been a big challenge for us. We're a bit the same, Fraser, in that our restrictions on social distancing are minimal as far as children are concerned. Adults, yes, but children, no. So what's happened with us is we've actually gone in 2 phases. So our 5 to 7-year-olds have been back for a week. And I'm at a large government primary school with 650 children at the school. So roughly half of our school has returned, the 5 to 7-year-olds, 5 to 8-year-olds, and then the 8 to 12-year-olds will return on the 9th of July as well. So there are lots of things that we thought we may have to have in place, more stringent measures as far as social distancing is concerned, that we don't necessarily have to follow, but we certainly do with adults. We learnt as we went. I think, the one thing that was really good was that we were prepared to make mistakes. We were prepared to be vulnerable. We were vulnerable in front of our children and our parents. We said, we've never done this before. We've never been in a pandemic, just like you haven't. And we will be modifying. We'll be making decisions, but we'll be modifying as we go. And I certainly think that that's been an incredible lesson for our parents, but also our children, to see us as learners. It was true inquiry. We were living it and we were modeling it. So, yeah.
Thanks. George or Beth or Fraser or Erin, anything that you wish you knew a month ago? Right? Things that have been different than you thought they might be?
Erin, go ahead. Yeah.
Just as Shaz mentioned, we would plan ahead because we thought we had certain information coming in that told us this is our course. And then on a Friday, a conference would happen where something entirely different was announced. And we're like, okay, well, we planned so much on that end. Let's throw all of that away. So I think one of the things just through this whole course that I wish I had kept in mind was, have your ducks in a row, but don't plan too far ahead, and be as transparent as you can with people. One of the questions that was in the sheet that I'll tag into of what I wish I had known asked a question about teacher anxieties. And we prepared quite a bit for student anxieties coming back into the school. And we discussed that there may be teacher anxieties. There are things that I wish we had thought about putting in place to support them. Teachers were coming in sharing they weren't sleeping, as people through this whole COVID are reporting. They were sharing that they were feeling really stressed and really anxious, that for a lot of teachers, they surprised themselves at how intolerant they were to a lot of the noise and commotion that normally happens in a school that teachers have quite a high threshold for. So we had teachers requesting quiet spaces and places where they could go to decompress. So I think kind of combining that of knowing in advance, just be responsive to the information as it comes, and don't get your head set in it being one way. The other thing I really wished I had done in advance was set up in advance a quiet space for teachers, like a quiet room that they could go to, that they knew was there, and that we had in advance maybe set up counseling conversations with the teachers. We did ultimately set them up once we started to see it was something that was really coming up. It's something in retrospect maybe we could have planned, or that I would suggest other schools plan for.
Yeah, that's one I wouldn't have thought of. Beth or George, anything surprising? other than
No, but
everything being surprising?
yeah, no, I think I really appreciate what Erin said there about thinking about the social or the emotional toll for teachers, because it is something to think about and to be as proactive as we can about. And it was something that for us as a leadership team, we did talk, in the same way around, do we need to set up buddies? Do we need to make sure that we as a leadership team are looking after us, we've got our list of people that we're checking in with, because it is an important issue, and it is really hard because it's not like going back to school. When we went back, it wasn't like going back on March 12th, which was the day before, campus closed. But one thing that really helped us a lot was we developed fairly early on, we developed guidelines or principles by which we wanted to make all decisions about the return to campus and what we would be guided by. So we had 4 principles, which were, the first one was protect the health and safety of students and staff, follow the guidelines set out by the Saxon authorities, provide students with some familiarity of school routines for social, emotional, and academic learning, and provide clear expectations for students, teachers, and parents during the return to campus. And those guidelines or those principles really helped us as we were making decisions, or as parents were questioning us about why we were doing things in certain ways, why we were going back in a phased return, why wasn't everyone just all coming back on the 18th of May. So being able to filter our communication and our decisions through these 4 principles really helped us. So that would be something I would, I think I would offer that as a piece of advice that was helpful.
It brings up this issue of how to not just help staff with that transition, but also parents. I've been curious about how you all manage parent comfort level in sending students back to school. So George, I'm tempted to share the video that you shared with me. I won't do that to you right now, but George has this great video just trying to help people feel comfortable and thinking about coming back to school. So I'll start with George. I'm curious, George, how did you help parents feel comfortable sending their children back? And what have you done if there are parents who aren't comfortable?
Yeah, I think just piggybacking off of what Erin and Beth were talking about, I think the well-being, still 2 parts, the well-being of the teachers. And I think those leaders out there that are going to be foraying into this realm, I think leading with empathy is very, very important. Understanding that, sometimes we need to deliver a message of sincerity, of just heartfelt, this is what I feel. Seeing the leader as a human being, not just like someone on top, boom, 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 boom. Humor played an important part of this as well, and making sure that you weave in some humor. Our motto over the last 2 months has been, we got this. And so every time we did a video chat or whatever, we'd end up with, we got this. And just reassuring the teachers that there isn't a gold standard. This is new for everybody. And so we as administrators support you to do the best that you can. Then we had 2 days of planning for the reopening. So we have the SLP, which is shared learning plan, the DLP, distant learning plan, and the RLP, which was the reopening plan. We had 2 days to plan for that. The first day, there was a palpable feeling of trepidation amongst the teachers, and it was important for us to honor that. The following day, there was a palpable feeling of excitement and getting ready to see the kids come back to our campus. And so one of the big things that really, really helped our reopening be successful is the use of videos. Our counselors, our teachers, our nurses, we all had a bunch of different quizzes, who's behind the mask, and a game about who's behind the mask. We had videos of how it's gonna look, where you stand in line. And we did a couple of other, some serious things and some silly things, but we had a whole host of videos. So when they came, and then we had our mascot out in front doing with some music, when you had all our teachers clapping the kids in. And so we created this very, very welcoming environment, which went down really, really well. The parents were over the moon, and the people who were sitting on the fence were like, okay, I think they do got this, and so we have right now about 86% of our kids back. And with the government giving the green light to have everybody back without anything on June 8th, we'll have about 90% back. So really prepping with videos helped really ease the community, and then updates and video clips of what is happening and what is the new normal look like in the classroom, and sharing those out through Seesaw and Google Classroom.
Is that pretty similar in Lausanne?
Yes, we had some really fun videos that were made as well, and there was quite a bit of energy around the welcome back. I think one practice that we started both for parents and students during remote learning that we're exploring how we keep. So two things. We began every single meeting with how are our teachers? And we had a spreadsheet that we were documenting. We met every single morning as a leadership team. So we would check in to make sure that between the three of us that we were constantly reaching out to every teacher and that we could document when we called them, even if it was just a WhatsApp reach out. So we were making sure we were constantly in check with the teachers. And then the other thing that we did with parents along the way was we started doing, I think from week one, Fraser, right? That we started doing parent surveys. And then as a leadership team, we would sit and analyze the feedback, and I would determine what needed to go to teachers and how do we need to shift, what the planning looks like. And that was actually really amazing. For anyone who likes to follow a design cycle and do immediate iterations, it was really helpful to say, okay, the way we're writing I can statements, parents don't understand it. Let's shift the language in those. Let's make those really clear. Or teachers started to make videos that were sort of like infomercials about the unit in writing that was coming up. And Matt, some of your work was really helpful with that to explain to parents what was going on. So through remote learning, I think we were able to build a different kind of trust with parents. And we were having regular webinars with parents where they could come into the Zoom, they would submit their questions in advance, and we would respond to their questions. So leading up, right before opening, we were able to have one of those sessions. We also had parent feedback that we were able to look at and plan ahead how we would address. And then there have been updates from both the homeroom teachers in their newsletters, through Seesaw, through videos that they've been sending out so people can see what the learning looks like in class. And I would say initially some of the parents who didn't want their children coming in, once they started to see all of the preparation and all of the thinking that was being laid out to it, they really eased up and were reminded that they could trust us because we had kind of built that relationship with them over remote learning. So all of those different little pieces came together that when we did come back into school, it was much easier to continue with that relationship of trust. We also, like George said, I think remembering that sense of humor and the fun, the energy when the children were coming back in the school was just beautiful. There were welcome signs everywhere and pictures of teachers and balloons, and just that sense of fun really made it a place where I think even teachers who were anxious leading up to it were really excited to be there.
Beth, sorry, go ahead.
I was just going to say, actually, just to add on to Erin's thing there is something which actually I wish we'd thought about beforehand. But before I get to that, one of the things I think, just to build on Erin's point about building trust, is all the way through our communication, we would say, we know this, we know A, B, and C, but we don't A, B, and C, but we don't know this, X, Y, and Z. And then we would say, we expect to know this on this date. And that actually helped a lot of people understand the structuring of the information. So we never set ourselves up as knowing everything. But one of the things I wish I'd been more aware of, actually, and had preempted, is the fact that because there was a great deal of diversity in the level of comfort or the perception of risk of parents, parent WhatsApp groups became problematic. Because you had parents who were saying, it's fantastic the school's open and everyone should go home, go to school immediately. And other parents on that same WhatsApp group saying, no, it's deadly, we're all going to die and students shouldn't go back. And if you send your child back, you're a bad parent. And so being aware of those groups, which of course are very much back channel groups, was very important. And later we had to step in to moderate those, to get and to say, absolutely, you can express your opinion, but you need to express it in a sensible kind of way based on fact, because people were kind of spiraling up. And so I wish I'd been more aware of those before so I didn't have to do the work of putting it back in.
And so one of the other things I know people are curious about is the impact on instruction. And I know that I hear all the time about fears of things because of changes in how environments are going to be in schools, that things will negatively impact instruction. Certainly things are more challenging, but trying to maintain high quality instruction when you have to be 6 feet away from a child, for example, right? I'm curious what you all are doing to try to maintain the high levels of instruction that you had before under these new constraints. Someone want to start off?
Yeah. I'll start off, Erin and Lausanne here. You know, this is such an excellent opportunity of really honing into what we believe about learning. So the first thing is that if a child's well-being isn't first looked after, learning isn't going to happen. So we were really clear with teachers, you know, coming back, let's make sure the children feel safe and settled in. That's your first priority. And the learning will come. Don't worry about those gaps. We'll close those gaps. That said, we are in the business of education and we need to make sure that high level of learning continues. So it was really that opportunity to dial in on our belief that less is more, and that being really, really clear on what matters and what is it that we need to make sure we achieve. So obviously that's different when you're looking at a year 1 child or kindergarten child who's just learning to read. We can't say, well, that's not core, that doesn't matter, we'll close that gap. But we can look at the other things that happen in the learning sphere. So we are thinking about next year, how we can begin our year as quickly as possible, getting as much data as possible to continue the learning. We've decided to dial in on really making sure we're clear on blended learning practices and how we can use technology effectively to differentiate, which obviously this time in remote learning has really lit a spark and a need to make sure we were getting that right. So we are looking at ways that we can really meet the children where they are, get that data as quick as possible, and zero in on what really matters in our teaching. We are preparing ourselves in advance that maybe we need to plan units to last a little bit longer so that we can go a little bit deeper in the learning, knowing there may be some gaps that are coming in, really zeroing in on the focused instructional practices within the core subjects, reading, writing, math, trying to make sure we're doing things as interdisciplinary as possible. In a way, it's been an exercise to go back to what really matters, making sure we're teaching the learners where they are and making sure our practice is as focused as it can be in the time that we have with the children.
Thanks. Anything else people want to add to that?
I think, Erin, you just echoed so many of the values that we've held true throughout this process. A few things that guided us was, the first one was definitely Maslow before Bloom, and we have maintained that all the way through. That well-being for everyone in our community is essential, and certainly was our priority and will continue to be our priority. Less is more is something that that we say often, and in this context, I think teachers needed to put that into practice. They had to choose. They really had to prioritize. Okay, within the time that we have with remote learning, we can only have 2 or 3 quality learning experiences that we can provide each day. So it actually made teachers really prioritize and synthesize down to what really matters. And that's what we'd like to hold on to. And it was really interesting, the very first day that we had our year 1s back, I walked into a classroom and one of our maybe more traditional teachers said, well, that's it. We learned so much through that. I know you say it all the time, Shaz, less is more, but now we're going to live it. And that focus on 2 or 3 quality learning experiences a day, rather than planning a whole lot of activities. It's taken a pandemic to shift lots of teachers thinking, but if that's what it's taken, it's been fantastic, because I don't see us going back. So I think the quality of instruction has just been honed by having to go remote.
Yeah, that's so refreshing to hear.
And I think the other piece, if I can add on to that, what Shaz said is what we're noticing with our students is the skills and what they're coming back with after this period of online learning. So they're able to, I know that they always were able to, and I think it's taken this for teachers to recognize that students can make their own choices about their learning. They can organize their time. They can ask big questions. They're really coming, and the conversations that we're having now are around what they're noticing that kids are able to do as a result of being independent for the last 50 plus days of learning, and that's been exciting. And I think for us as well, what we're seeing with a shortened school day and focused time is the power and when we need those long extended periods of time for learning. So kids are feeling like they're much more efficient in their learning being back at school for even a shorter school day. Teachers are feeling it, and I think that's been a real benefit that we're able to see and able to continue making learning gains every day despite the situation that we find ourselves in.
I think, to jump in on that as well, there are a couple of questions that have come in through the feed around differentiated learning for students with learning support needs. I will say one of the things that maybe we were struggling with a little bit prior to going into remote learning is we had moved away from pullout and had gone into trying to be more collaborative teaching. And so, of course, as you go through that transition, there are always some growing pains with that. This is my core learning, and what has been amazing is as teachers were using their planning template to share what the learning expectations were at home, we had them done 4 days. They were ready to go 4 days prior to it needing to be published to parents, because then we had time with the student support services to dig in and look at what those intended learning outcomes are and how we can differentiate those for the students with needs. And then the student support services teachers were able to then differentiate according to what the needs were, according to who they had in on their online lessons. We also started to map out for the next 4 weeks, what are the big picture goals that we have coming up, and how can we see the different learners, whether it is someone who needs it extended or someone who's going to need a little bit more remedial work. Is there front loading that we need to happen? Can we just shift what the learning experience is, or do we need a completely different tool available for them? So that pushed the envelope for us a little bit on, again, being really clear on our intended learning, and then being able to really differentiate that for the learners with needs, both in the middle school and in primary. I can't speak as well to what was happening in our upper grades, but I can say that it was full hands on deck with our student support services, reaching out to the children and making sure we were really implementing the changes. It was so successful that now that we're back, I have teams of teachers who continue that core practice. Another practice that came up incredibly helpful in this part, we were inspired by a teacher at a different international school that was making journals for all of their learning. And the journals were so successful in students being independent, having the self-management, organization, thinking skills, the reflection that came out of them was incredible. And also it became incredibly easy to set up different levels within those journals. So even when we come back to school and we're face-to-face, we will have blended learning stations with these different leveled journals, but that student support services could go in and shift as well, even if it was just adding different kinds of visuals, or teachers started to play around with giving that the recorded lessons for students who need more auditory support. So really just having some of those key practices in place made it so easy for student support services to look at how they can differentiate and meet the needs of the learners.
George, you tried to say something a second ago? Or you?
Yeah, no, Yeah, I was just basically echoing what the others were saying about the learning. One of the nice things for us was the smaller class sizes. So the opportunity for individual feedback increases, right? So Matt, we can nudge the children along, right?
Great. And I'm curious about changes to teachers' days, just even some of the very practical things, temperature checks or hand washing and sanitizing, or just what's different for a teacher from the time they come to school to leaving school? What kinds of things have you put in place?
For us, the teachers, if they're outside the classroom, in the hallway or whatever, they need to wear a mask. Kids were not required to mask, and we were not required to wear a mask on the playground. But each teacher had to get their temperature checked in the morning, and the school issued the masks. But all that is changing on June 8th. Mask will be up to you.
Okay. So we're the same as George, and we don't take our kids' temperatures as they come in. We actually have a form, and this is again something from the state of Saxony that requires schools to do this. And it's a form that every day the parents need to sign that says the student is in good health and doesn't have a temperature. And our job is to cite that the parent has signed that form, and then the student can come in. So we do that before the students enter into the campus. There's a number of us that are out there that are checking forms, and if you could believe, I thought these forms, this is never going to work. You know, I was thinking like, imagine a 7-year-old with the forms, and how is this going to be? It works. I think on a day, I might, over the last 2 weeks, I may have had about 5 kids that have forgotten to have their form signed. So when they forget to have their form signed, then they come to the office, and the parent is meant to bring it in, but we've been accepting an email that just says it's, you know, my child is free of fever and no one in our family has COVID-19 symptoms. But that's something, teachers don't have to worry about that. But I think for teachers, it's been the number of routines and expectations that they had to get their heads around. And when we first started all of this, like I said, we had gone back with only grade 4 and grade 11. And so it was a great way to try things out. And they were the ones really that paved the way, and that were able to, I think, alleviate a lot of concerns from other teachers. But then when we introduced more grade levels coming back, one thing that I did was just put out, we had a Google Meet staff session together, and then I put out a question with question and answer sheets that teachers were coming up with. And, you know, it could be anything possible that people were coming up with on that sheet, some of which we had the answer for at that time, some of which we didn't have the answer for. And, you know, we explained that, and some things are in your control and some things are not in your control. And we were focusing on what they were able to control and what was something that I would control or that the state of Saxony would control. So we went through a process like that and just kept this Google Doc going with, and if somebody had the answer, they would put the answer in, because again, guidance was coming out and guidance was happening quite quickly. Often, like Erin said earlier, at 5 o'clock in the afternoon on a Friday. So that would be the thing that I wish I would have known before. If the authorities could make a decision, maybe not on a Friday afternoon, that would be really helpful.
I'm sure. I'm going to be careful time-wise. Jean, I know there have been questions coming in, but I haven't really been able to follow them. Are there some common questions or repeated questions, Jean, that you want to ask before I ask another one?
Yes. There have been several questions around if a child is tested, does test positive, what is the procedure? Is the entire school closed? Do you have a certain number of students that need to test positive before your school closes? If you guys could speak to what that particular procedure is.
And for teachers probably too, if they test positive.
Yes,
right?
also.
For teachers and students,
yeah. For students.
I can talk about Switzerland because it's really clearly laid out and it's changed quite considerably. So if anybody tests positive, they're isolated, or actually if anyone is unwell, they are isolated. They have to put a mask on, they have to go home. if one person is found to test positive, then there is no action. If two people are tested positive and they're in a group, then actually it's the cantonal doctor's office that does the tracking. Mm-hmm. So there are some questions about whether the school as a whole shut, and the answer is no.
Yeah, we're the same, and that's why we're keeping with strict grouping, so that within the groups, then they would determine, okay, you've been in contact with someone for more than, I think they say something like more than 15 minutes of close contact. So it might just be that one grade homeroom, 2A or 2B, that is that they are all quarantined, or having to self-isolate, quarantine together. So that's, and then all of the tracing is done from our local health authority.
Yes, so we had a case, it was negative, but it turned out it was an early childhood, it was a kindergarten section, where actually it was the teaching assistant's father who showed symptoms. And so we sent the whole class home, and we were waiting for the results. And if the results would have come back positive, then they would have been distant learning plan for 2 weeks. But the result came back negative. So if we do have a symptom, then all those kids, as well as their siblings, need to stay home. And so that's the stance we've adopted.
And I know that some of you have quantity of substitute issues, right? That there's, especially in some of your schools, it's harder to find substitute teachers. And so I'm wondering, when you have, if there's anything you've done, or how are you handling that with not always having enough subs for some of the things that you would need? I'm assuming it's kind of all hands on deck, like somebody said, but.
Well, we haven't run into it as a problem, but we identified it as a very difficult issue. Because absolutely right. Once we get to our limit, we get to our limit. Mm-hmm. And we're lucky because so far we haven't. Yeah,
we're the same. Fingers are crossed. Over the 50 plus days of home learning that we had, I didn't have a teacher call in sick that whole time. So now it's also just fingers crossed that we'll be in the same way. And also then we might need to use our single subject teachers to come in if it's for a homeroom class, or we don't know. Yeah.
There were a number of questions around students with special needs, and I know, Erin, you spoke to this somewhat, but there were questions around how those students' needs were met, particularly with the different education delivery models, and then specific therapies, speech, occupational, and physical therapy, and how those needs were being met. I know that some people responded in the chat and said that that in their community, those things were provided outside of school. For those folks where it may be provided in school, if you could speak a little bit to how that has been provided either remotely or through a blended plan, or with physical distancing, how that has been accomplished.
And part of that might be, is a mask enough for that in your situations, right? So if you have a mask, can you do physical therapy versus, right? Sorry, go ahead.
We've had quite a success with our EAL support teacher. We only have one EAL teacher who really is trying to spread herself very widely when she's on campus. And so she found that she was much more effective, and we were witness to that as well in a remote setting. Now, the situation is that she has a medical issue that makes her feel vulnerable at the moment to come back onto campus. And so she has decided to continue working remotely and setting up Zoom sessions for particular groups of kids who are now back on campus. And we're looking at this as an opportunity for her to continue that, because she was, as I said, being probably more productive in that context, but it also then helps her with her situation of not feeling that she's medically fit enough to actually be on campus. So it's turned into a positive, which is great.
Yeah, we found the same, Shaz, with our reading interventionist. Really is a big part of what she does, and she was providing her support online in one-on-one or small group Google Meet sessions, and then she as well is unable to return to campus because of a couple of medical issues. And so she continues to do this, and that happens as well for some kids. It'll happen in the afternoon when they're having their when blended learning, which is very, the single subjects, it's all very independent and based on choice. So very fluid for kids, but then some kids will have their reading intervention session at that time. And it seems to be, it seems to be working.
For us, our things like occupational therapy and speech are all provided by external providers. So it was really done on a case-by-case scenario to see what the child needed and whether or not it could be supported remotely. So I know some of the children would have video calls in with their occupational therapist, and so parents were just asked to have at home certain exercise equipment that they could manage and carry over. So some of those were done live, some of those were provided as recorded sessions. So once it was recorded, the child could do that as their morning routine independently. And I know that there were some calls set up between the person who provided the therapy and the parents to just talk them through what to look for. For speech therapy, that was less successful in an online format, in part because the children who were receiving speech therapy for either language processing delays or expressive language, the Zoom actually ended up creating a whole nother layer of difficulty for them. We really realized quite quickly, it made me do a deep dive in saying, are other people around the world seeing this, that children who have auditory processing or language processing delays, it was actually an extra barrier for them and a heavy cognitive lift. So we chose to back off. Most of the families did not continue with their speech therapy. Student support services, I think I mentioned earlier, remained pretty engaged. Now that we're back, it's all been, again, a case by case. The person who comes into the school for occupational therapy has been able to continue with his students. He just stands a little bit of a distance away. But again, with our social distancing rules, it was where possible. So he wears a mask when he's working with the children and will get in close as he needs to. And that was about his personal safety level. And then the speech therapist has also come back in, and she's just keeping a little bit of a distance at the table with the children. One of the benefits, again, is teachers were doing a deep dive. So if we knew we had a child in a cohort who was normally receiving some of these services, we would say, okay, what do we need to be thinking about as teachers to make sure we're truly meeting the needs of these children? Those are always conversations that we aim to engage in. This time it felt like the gravitas of the gamble was higher. So the investment was a little bit richer. So that has been a really nice unexpected outcome from it.
Great. And I know we're out of time, so I just will end with this. So to each of you, is there anything that you think would be helpful for us in the States, right? Or wherever you are, not just States. Is there anything else that you haven't been able to talk about, just tips or things that you'd want to share real quickly? Anything you wanted to say but haven't had a chance?
One of the, I mean, and it kind of goes to the point of this meeting here, actually. I think we moved into remote learning really well. And I think the reason we did that is because we talked to as many people as we could manage before we set ourselves and our policy. So we talked to schools in Hong Kong, we talked to schools in China, and we talked to schools in Singapore. And we just asked the really basic questions: what works and what doesn't? Tell me what doesn't work. And so that really shaped our approach. And I think that's been enormously useful. And I think the idea of kind of reinventing everything for yourself is just foolish.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
we were the same, Fraser. Oh, sorry, Beth, I cut across you.
No, you go first, Shaz.
Just
not
like
the first time that this has happened.
We're on different continents now. We used to do it when we were in the same room. Fraser, I'd like to say the same thing. We learned so much from other people, and the generosity of sharing on social media, and that's continuing. I have just I've started a Padlet just for tonight, and I've put a whole lot of resources on there, and they're mainly blog posts, but current blog posts from various people who are talking about this, with just tips from various parts of the world for schools who are already moving back. So I will continue to add to that, but I'll put a link to the Padlet in there, because that's definitely the big tip, to not reinvent the wheel, and to know that other people are trying this as well.
Yeah, and
over to you.
Well, then she took the words right out of my mouth, which is the mark of a great friend over there. But yeah, no, honestly, I think like Shaz said, I just want to give a shout out to all of the people that we have learned from. And we were really just engaged and following from the start of when schools were closing campus and they were shifting online. We learned so much in that time from schools in Asia. And then for us now, as we were reopening and learning from schools that went ahead of us. So, big shout out to people in Denmark, Copenhagen International School. They were freely sharing a lot of their work, and it really helped guide us. So that's, one thing I'm thrilled to have been here and to be able to pay it forward and share what we can. So I'll add some things to Shaz's Padlet. I'll give you a couple of things, and anything there that we've got on our website for public viewing. Happy for people to just reinvent, do what you need to do, because we've all been there together.
Yeah. Anything else, George?
Yeah, I think it's a we thing, and it's a shared thing, and less is more. I think someone asked about in 2-3 months, are you going to be reopening? And we understand that the curriculum is so overladen with so much stuff, and what's important now, what's important 5 years, 10 years from now, needs to be discussed in a collaborative manner with your teams. And so just err on the side of less and go deep.
Great. And so I know George has already offered to share some videos. I have one in particular of George that I would love to share, but and other resources. And so it's a little tricky because I know there are people on the call today that we don't have their email for, or way even of emailing this large of a group. But Chad Hilliker at Hamilton County will talk just a little bit about how to be able to share any of those resources today. In fact, Chad, if we were going to post something on the Hamilton County website, would that be the place? Or I have a website that I could post things on. What might work best there, Chad?
So here's what we'll do. Matt, we currently have a couple things on our webpage, like where we're keeping track of things. I'll have a special page made for us as a group. I've been keeping track of all the comments in the chat. I'm going to try to organize those in a way that makes sense. And based on the resources as well. So we'll share that out. We'll share a link with a video so that people can watch the video because we've recorded this. That'll be on the web. So afterwards, our website, we're hcesc.org. We're out there, but at the same time too, Matt, I'll share that with you. You can share it with your people. Just realize that it will be out there. For search purposes, I will make people's lives easy. If you use Matt's basically title for today, we will put that on the webpage. So when you search, you'll be able to find it. So that'll probably be up. Give us a day or two to get that up, but we will get that up as quickly as possible. We'll wait till we get all the resources. And Matt, I'll work with you on that. And I just want to say, and I'm going to be quiet after this. Thank you so much for your time today. This really has probably been more helpful than you realize. It's really been comforting to hear the work that's going on. So thank you.
Yeah, I can't thank each of you enough for doing this. I know how busy you are. You're in the midst of this and figuring these things out. And so for you to take your time today, I think really speaks to your generosity and willingness to share and to pay forward what help from other people who helped you also. We just all thank you so very much. And thank you, Chad, for figuring out a way to do that. So I'm not trying to email 300 people now. So I hear that. So Hamilton County, please go to Hamilton County or HCESC, right? For any of those resources.
So if you're still in the chat, I can put it in again. And
I'll leave the chat open here for a little while prior to make sure people can get it. So not that I'm not happy to email people, but that's probably more efficient.
I'd also like to thank everyone on the panel. I have heard your names and how wonderful Matt thinks you all are and how honored he is to work with you. And I'm happy now to be able to put a face with a name and to hear you. So thank you so much for doing this. This has been fantastic.
Great. Thanks so much,
It's a
everybody.
pleasure. Thank you.
Thank you. Take care, everyone.
Yes, you too.
Thanks. Bye.
Talk to each of you soon.
Okay.
I'll
Thanks.
see you tomorrow.
Yes, it's Shaz. See you tomorrow.
Now I'm going to bed and I'll see you.
Exactly. We'll just keep this pattern going,
We'll just
Shaz.
keep doing this. Yeah.
Exactly.
Good night, Shaz.
It was nice
Good night,
to see
Shaz.
everyone. Thank you, Matt. It was really great to touch
Erin and-
base with you.
Erin and Fraser, so much. And Fraser, I'm so embarrassed. I don't know if I hope you didn't see the opening slide where I had your last name somehow misspelled. So sorry about that. But thank you so much for everyone for being on.
Yeah, I'm sorry I jumped in late. I was getting the wheel of death and I was like, I shut down my computer and then I went to my phone and I don't know what was going on.
And I could see it waiting to admit you, and I forgot that I was in charge of the admitting people at first. And so I saw that, but so I saw it kept saying joining. So I was worried. So I'm glad you got in.
Me too.
No, I really do. I
I'm going
think
to
that's-
And I'm curious about, is your school year round? Are all your schools year round, or is there a later summer break?
we get out June 26th is our closing day.
Okay.
And we're June 24th and go back like around August 16th.
Okay. All right.
18th.
Yeah. And Shaz is middle of or
December.
beginning of December.
So I do remember that calendar. Got a ways to go.
Yeah.
Yeah, we sure do.
All right.
George,
thank
I'm
you.
happy to see you in the room. And Matt, maybe you should be here to eavesdrop on this. George, we're trying to pull together PD for next year, and I would love to look at some shared experiences. So I'll reach out to you one-to-one later.
Okay.
Fine. See, Beth, and we'll try to get together at some point.
Yeah. Let's hope. Yeah. Let's make it happen.
Borders open June 15th, I believe.
Yeah. It's a good thing, right?
Yeah. All right. See y'all.
Okay,
Thanks,
guys,
Matt.
take
Thanks
care.
for this together.
Thanks, Beth. Thanks, Erin.
Okay.
Thanks, Fraser.
Yes, I
Gotta
do.
run.
Thanks, Shaz.
Okay.
Someone has asked how we find the link to the Padlet.
It's in the chat.
It is in the chat.
Do you want me to
Yeah.
put it? Do you want me to put it in again right now so it's down the bottom?
Yeah. Put it again, Shaz.
Yeah, that would be great. And then Chad, you have it and you'll put it in our page.
Yeah, I'm going to put the resources at the very top. So anything that's course, I'll put at the top so people can see that first. And then I'll have like a separate sheet for the chat, just so people can follow that. You know, I figure capture what everybody said. Just if anyone wants to go back and check that. So.
Okay.
And I'll send any stuff that I have. You want me to send it to you, Shaz? A couple of things.
Yeah,
that
I'll see if I
there.
give you permission to
Make
get on that Padlet.
All right. Hey, you guys, I gotta go. We gotta
Thanks,
get we have to catch the train. All right. Talk soon.
Thanks, Beth.
Okay,
All right, take care. Bye.
bye.
All right.
I've just put it in again now.
Thank you. I see that. Thank you very much.
Okay, and I'll keep adding to it because I've had a massive Padlet that I've used with our staff throughout the whole process, and I just keep adding more and more columns. So I just made one just for this one, which is on transitioning, and I'll continue to add to it as well.
That's wonderful.
And so will Beth, if I let her. Yeah.
All right.
Okay, so
Thanks
this
so
is
much.
how it was supposed to look, Jean. See, Matt said, my sister, you know, and a couple of colleagues would just like to ask a few questions. And so would that be okay? So this was how I sort of envisaged that we'd have, like, you know, a few of us, a couple of your friends. And next I see cast of thousands.
And then Matt said, hey, what do you think if we maybe open this up?
Well, I don't know if anyone knows, we had 240 people who had RSVP'd, and I was watching the participant number get into the 290s, and I thought, oh, God.
Yeah,
Whoa.
So it was right on the edge there, but we were fine.
I just
no,
thank you
it's
guys
great.
so much. I really do
Oh,
think
it's a
it was
pleasure.
needed, and people so are appreciative of your knowledge, and just thank you.
Well,
so
look,
much.
and what we can do from, from afar, as I said to Matt today, with everything that you are going through at the moment in your country on so many levels, the least we can do. The least we can do. So our hearts are with you.
Thank you.
Very kind.
Very nice.
Yeah.
Thank you.
All right,
Okay.
Chad, I'll touch
See you
base with you
later.
later, Chad. Thanks, Chaz. I'll see you soon.
See you.
I just dropped in the box. Somebody asked for a copy of the journals that we made, Matt. So I just put the link to it in there. So if you want to add that to the Padlet, you're free to feel free to do it.
Oh, that's so kind of you. There, I saw somebody commented on wanting that, so that's so kind of you to do.
Yeah, my pleasure. Everyone have a wonderful
Yep.
afternoon.
I know you need to go. Thanks, Erin.
Bye.
Thank you.
Enjoy the evening.
All right, Chad. I'll